Engineers from America and overseas have created a world car, the new Ford Escort.
Back in 1981, Ford introduced the Escort in North America, a subcompact car to rival the Chevy Chevette. Ford called it their first world car, as it was originally designed in Europe, but the American Escort ended up being an entirely different car than its European counterpart. Despite that, the Escort would soon become the best-selling car in the U.S. This is the story of the American Ford Escort. This is my old car.
Ford Escort, built in America to take on the world.
Prior to 1981, the Escort name had been used by Ford in Europe since 1955, initially as a trim level on the Ford Squire, but then later in 1968 as a compact car that bore a striking resemblance to the Honda Civic of the mid-70s. The Escort was such a hit in the UK that Ford decided to bring the same name to America in 1981 as a replacement for a car that they desperately needed to distance themselves from, the Pinto, for reasons that just about everybody knows. Although the design of the American Ford Escort was done in Europe, the car that Americans got in 1981 had almost no matching parts to the ones sold in the UK, which was done to give it a more Americanized look. It debuted 5 years after its biggest competitor, the Chevy Chevette, and although it was about the same size and price, the Escort had front-wheel drive, something that Chevette never had during its entire 10-year run. The Escort was initially launched with two body styles, a 3-door hatchback and a 5-door wagon, and soon afterwards offered a 5-door hatchback. Lots of chrome trim was standard, except on the SS model, which was intended to be a sportier option. And the SS was not just available for the 3-door, but also for the wagon. However, the SS name was only used in 1981, as it was in conflict with a trim level used on GM cars, such as the Monte Carlo. Starting in 1982, the SS was replaced with a GT. Ford also provided an almost identical model for their Mercury division, called a Lynx, although that only lasted until 1987. Also starting in 1981, Ford sold a variant of the Escort called the EXP. The EXP shared almost everything with the Escort except the body, as the EXP was longer, lower, and more aerodynamic. But the biggest difference was that the EXP only had 2 seats, despite not only being longer than the Escort, but it also weighed about 200 pounds more. And in its first generation, the EXP is probably best known for its headlamps, that bore a striking resemblance to certain amphibious species. In other words, it had frog eyes. Mercury also sold a rebadged version called the LN7, which had a different rear window design, but it sold so poorly that it was gone after 1983. The first Escorts were only available with a 65 horsepower, 1.6-liter 4-cylinder, with 4-speed manual or 3-speed automatic transmissions. By 1982, it bumped up to 70 horsepower, or 80 if you got the GT. By 1984, a turbo was also added to the 1.6-liter 4, available on both the GT and EXP, rated at 120 horsepower. And also by 1984, both the Ford Escort and Mercury Lynx could be had with a 52 horsepower 2-liter diesel, supplied by Mazda, since back then Ford owned 25% of Mazda. By 1985, the Escort received a facelift that included composite headlamps and restyled tail lamps, and an upgraded 4-cylinder now up to 1.9 liters. Although the Escort's Mercury twin, the Lynx, was gone by 1987, Mercury replaced it with the Tracer, which was based on the Mazda 323, until Mazda replaced it with the 1990 Protege. Also in 1985, the 2-seater Ford EXP got a much-needed facelift, losing the frog eyes, and instead sporting a front end very similar to the Escort, and in turn changed its name to the Ford Escort EXP. From the inside, except for the missing back seat, it looked just like the Escort, but it struggled to compete with competitors such as the Honda CRX, the Toyota MR2, and the Pontiac Fiero. By 1986, Ford also offered a trim level of the Escort called the Pony. The Pony was Ford's cheapest model, with lots more plastic and vinyl, and basics such as power steering and air conditioning were not offered as options. But with less options meant less weight, making them more fuel efficient. And by 1987, the Chevy Chevette was history, so Ford had succeeded in eliminating the car that was once its closest competitor. Another subtle facelift was done in 1988, but much bigger changes came with the second generation that ran from 1991 through 1996. No longer based on a European design, it now was based on Mazda's B platform, essentially going back to sharing a platform with the Mercury Tracer. The new Escort was essentially a twin of the model Ford sold in Asia and Australia called the Laser, but Ford kept the name in North America as the Escort, not just because of name recognition, but also since Chrysler was already using the Laser name on its own car in its Plymouth division. Another change in 1988 was the elimination of the Escort EXP model. Having no big improvement in performance as compared to its rivals, Ford instead concentrated on the EXP's replacement, the Ford Probe. Unlike the EXP, the Probe had a back seat, but like the Escort, it was front-wheel drive to help differentiate it from the Ford Mustang. The probe also helped ensure the Mustang remained rear-wheel drive, which is another whole story itself, maybe for a future episode. Initially starting with just a hatchback model, Ford introduced a four-door sedan option of the Escort in 1992, which helped boost sales. By 1995, they were back to selling 3- or 5-door hatchbacks, sedans, and wagons, all at the same price, and all with Mazda-based 1.8 or 1.9-liter four-cylinder engines ranging in horsepower from 88 to 127. The GT models, which were sold only as 3-door hatchbacks, differentiated from other Escorts with a revised grille and a rear spoiler. Despite their better practicality over a sedan or coupe, the hatchback started falling out of favor by the mid-90s, enough for Ford to eliminate the hatchback model for the third generation of the Escort, starting in 1997. Also a big change was the introduction of a 2-door coupe, the Escort ZX2, not just because it replaced the Escort GT, but it also was intended to replace the Ford Probe. The Probe previously filled the slot of Ford's affordable sporty coupe entry after the demise of the Ford Escort EXP. The ZX2 featured a 2-liter four-cylinder that was also the base engine for the larger Ford Contour and Mercury Mystique, but it had better performance in the smaller ZX2. Ford even introduced a higher performance model called the ZX2 SR, meant to compete against other factory-built tuner cars such as the Honda Civic Si and the Dodge Neon ACR. Ford's racing division helped develop this limited edition model that only sold around 2,100 units. However, despite an all-new look for the Escort, in which it sported a very similar rounded jelly bean look that Ford also pushed with the redesigned Taurus, the future of the Escort was in doubt. In 1999, after successfully introducing it in Europe, Ford introduced the Focus for the 2000 model year in North America. Considering the Focus's nearly identical size and class, the obvious overlap meant the Escort wasn't going to be around much longer. As a result, after 1999, the Escort wagon, along with the twin Mercury Tracer sedan and wagon, were dropped. And by 2002, the Escort sedan was dropped for consumer sales, but continued to be sold for fleet and rental sales until it ended production in February of 2002. The ZX2 lasted a little longer, ending production by March of 2003, but likely no one missed it, thanks to the introduction of the Ford Focus RS in 2002. The Escort, just like the Chevette, was for most people a disposable car, so it's rare to see a wagon or sedan in good condition today. Unlike the Chevette, which never made any serious attempt to have a more performance-oriented model, there are still some Ford Escort GTs and ZX2s out there which have been modified to improve their looks and performance. But for the most part, they were overshadowed by the Ford Focus RS, which maintained its status as one of the most popular hot hatches of the 2000s, until Ford succumbed to the overwhelming popularity of SUVs, killing the Focus and eventually every other non-SUV in its North American lineup, except for the Mustang, starting in 2018. So were you a fan of the original Escort? Or did you try to make yours a better hot hatch to rival the Focus RS? Leave a comment and let me know. If you like this episode, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a suggestion in the comments or email me at the address shown here. See you next time.